All right, blood platelets. We'll talk about blood platelets today. And the picture, get our pen going right here. This picture is showing them much, much bigger than they really are. So this thing right here, where I'm pointing to it with the arrow, has that funny looking goblin hat, looks like it. So these are blood platelets, and they're much, much smaller than the red blood cells right here, these red blood cells. They're red, right? Much smaller than red blood cells. And the white blood cell here, white blood cell, is much, much bigger than the red blood cell. So platelets basically, they just help with our blood. They control bleeding. That's the main thing about the blood platelets. So let's get a clear screen. So here are our red blood cells. And our red blood cells, interesting thing about them is red blood cells do not have DNA. And of course, they're vital because they carry oxygen. They carry oxygen to our lungs, right? We need them. They also take CO2, carbon dioxide, out, right? So they're bringing the oxygen into our lungs and they're taking the CO2 out of our lungs. So that's the red blood cell. And these little platelets, I mean, I'll make some little dots here. These are the platelets, and they control bleeding. And by the way, we have over 30 trillion cells in our body. Trillion now. 30 trillion cells. Skin cells, white blood cells, and so forth. So here's a very oversimplified version, artistic version of the platelets. Remember, they're not that big, but here they are. Let me circle them. There's a platelet. So again, they control bleeding. And just very basically, what they do is if you get a cut, let's say you get a cut, they will help form clots. Form clots. So you don't bleed, right? So they help your blood clot when you cut yourself. They also help stop blood clots forming when you don't need blood clots. So you need a blood clot if you cut yourself and you're bleeding, but you don't need them any other time. So that's what platelets do. They're also called thrombocytes. So let me write that down. I'll write it over here. Thrombocytes. So whatever you want to call them, thrombocytes, platelets, it's up to you. All right, so look at the platelets over here, as you can see. So we have our red blood cells, and let's say we had a cut. Get our pen going. So we had a cut here. You're bleeding, right? We have green blood today. Maybe we have Vulcan blood. Well, you get the idea. So these platelets are going to help form clots, so we can stop the bleeding. And you can see here we have these white blood cells here, these phagocytes, right? They're coming in to kill these things right here. This is the bacteria. So as you can see right here, the bacteria are these little black dots. And the white blood cells are coming in to eat them. So we need our white blood cells. Our white blood cells help kill invaders, right? And the red blood cells are bringing the oxygen, but we're bleeding. And so the platelets will form a blood clot, stop the bleeding. That's it. That's what they do basically, right there. And here's another picture to show the size of those platelets. Get our pen going there. So right here, you see these are the platelets. You see the size compared to the red blood cells over here. And you can see that all these other things here, right here, I put a 1 to it and a 2. These are all white blood cells, different types of white blood cells that help protect us. Have their different functions in the body. And we'll talk about white blood cells in another video. So, and generally, these platelets right here that help clot blood, help us prevent us from bleeding to death, they're about 6 times smaller than these red blood cells. And again, the red blood cells are smaller than the white blood cells. So where are they made? Well, they're made in bone, right? Here they are, right? They come from the bone marrow. And from the bone marrow, you have these, oops, this is just showing right here that platelets control bleeding in our bodies. Platelets control bleeding in our bodies. But let's go back to the bone. So from the bone marrow, this red bone marrow, you're going to get these stem cells right here. And they're called hematopoietic. Hematopoietic. And just think of them as stem cells. So from the stem cells, you can get the red blood cells, the white blood cells right over here, and of course the platelets. So the platelets come from the bone marrow. And again, if you're interested, this is, I'll say it slowly, it's hematopoietic. Hematopoietic. Think of a toe and a poetry, right? Some people say hematopoietic, so you can say hematopoietic or hematopoietic. I say hematopoietic. So again, just think of them as stem cells, and they're forming the red blood, the white blood cells, and the platelets. So just basically, they come from bone. Now, the normal range of what you should have in your blood, you should have a range, and I'll write it over here. I change the color. Change it to this color right there. So you should have about 150,000 to, this is normal range, 450,000 per microliter. 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 And if you want to know what a microliter is, so a microliter is 1 millionth of a liter. Right? And how many liters do we have in our blood? We have about, it depends on the person too, but we have about 5 liters. So we have a lot of platelets. Just do the math. So again, when we say 150,000 to 450,000, that's per microliter. And a microliter is 1 millionth of a liter. And the last thing is, well, what if they are too low? Well, if they're too low, you can easily bruise. You can have internal bleeding, right? And a major thing is that you just won't stop bleeding, right? If they're really low. So that's platelets today.